Hello and welcome to another Squarebit training tutorial. In this tutorial, we're going to look at the custom form builder. Now, Squarebit comes with some forms installed by default, and those are under Forms Manage. You can see those forms because they'll have a type of Squarebit form. So these are forms that are included when you set up your Squarebit account. And then we can see we also have some other forms in here. These ones have a type of custom form. These are custom forms that we've created. Now, to create those custom forms, you go to the form builder, and then from this screen, you can click on Add New. So let's do that right now. All right, so this is the interface for creating forms in Squarebit. What you can see here is we have a container, main container. This is our form container, and in here we have a title and description. And then within that, we have our sections container, and then we have our first section here. Let's start from the top and work our way down. Up here, you'll see this big settings button. This button does exactly the same thing as this button right here. If we click it, we'll get a little form where we can edit the name and description of our form. Let's do that. Let's call this demo video form. This is a test. We also have the option here whether or not we want to publish this form when we save it. I'm going to leave it unpublished for now. Hit update. See, as soon as I make those changes are reflected here on the form builder preview. Excellent. All right, so next we have our default section. And in here we have a title and description. So if we click the same button here, we'll get the settings for the section. So here we can change this section to section 1 and no description needed. And we can update these settings. So you can see that changes automatically there. So far, so good. These two things, very familiar. All right, up here we've got two new buttons. The first one here, if we click it, will open up a field drawer. And within that, we have all the available fields that we can use to build forms. Address, age, carrier name, checkbox, checkboxes, date, email, and so on. Let's try dragging one of these fields in. I'm going to drag an address. You can see that an area becomes highlighted. When I drag it, that's an area that you can actually drop that field. So if I let go, that field will now load a preview into that particular section. All right. Now this field itself also has a little settings icon. If we click it, we get contextual settings for that particular field. So for an address, we can see here that we actually have placeholder values for address line 1, and line 2, the city, etc. All right. So next to this Add Fields button, we have this little lightning bolt. This is the Quick Actions menu. From here, we have the option to duplicate and delete this particular section. If I click duplicate, you can see that the section gets copied, pasted below with all the fields that were in that section. If I hit delete, it'll ask me to confirm, and then it'll remove that section. Pretty straightforward. All right, so now we know how to add fields to a section. What about adding a new section? Well, if we scroll down here, we can see we have a button at the bottom, Add Section. Click that, and we have two options, a default section and a table section. I'll go over the table section in just a moment. For now, let's drag a default section in. You can see here, if we drop it here, what will happen is it appears above that particular section that we dropped it on. I'll delete that. Let's try this again. Now, if I drag this below the section in this little space, it'll actually get placed below that section. Okay, so now we have two sections. Here we can add some more fields. So let's do the name field and let's do a signature field. Okay, we've got another section. All right, there are some formatting options that are available to us for these sections. So you can see by default that sections appear in two columns. What if we wanted to make this field full width? To do that, click the settings icon on the field itself, scroll down to the bottom, and find the part where it says expand field full width. Check it and click update. Now you can see the field is taking up the full width. Excellent. Okay, let's look at the other section. Click Add Section, and from here we're going to grab the table section and drag it right below. All right, so a table section is a little different than a default section. It's got a table in it. And by default, it has 2 columns and 2 fields. So these fields can be changed by clicking on the Add Field button and putting a new field in there. Now, it's important to note that some fields aren't allowed in a table section. So if I drag this address here, you'll see you cannot add an address here. Okay, so let's select the date field. Put that here, and let's select the drop-down field. Perfect. Okay, we've got a drop-down and a date field. What if I wanted to have more than 2 columns? Well, let's go up to the table section settings, click that, scroll down to the bottom here, and we have some options. Column count is set to 2 by default, so I'm going to change that to 3. And then row count. How many rows can this table have? I'm going to set it to 7. Okay, I'm going to update. Now you can see that we have 3 columns, but where's my 7 rows? If you look down here, it'll explain a little bit to us. It says the table will be rendered with 7 rows. All rows will be visible when the table loads. So what this is indicating is that yes, it saved our setting for 7 rows, but the way the form builder works, it doesn't make sense to show us all 7 rows since the data is going to be repeated. So here it's just showing us that yes, indeed, it'll render 7 rows. This next line here says all rows will be visible when the table loads. Okay, that's interesting. Let's go back into the settings for the table section. And at the bottom here, you can see row visibility. There's 2 options: show all rows, which we have selected, and show initial row. If we select show initial row, it says only the first field will be shown initially. The user can add more rows as needed up to the row count. Okay, let's try that. You can see that our little help text updates here. It says only the first row will be visible on initial load. Okay, neat. Let's go back into those table settings and look at some of these other options we have here. So we already looked at the column count and the row count. We also have the column headers. So here it says that we can customize these column headers by separating them with a semicolon. So by default, it's just going to do column 1, 2, 3, and so on, depending on your column count. Let's change this to say task, hazard, and mitigation. All right, so I've updated that. And we also have the same options here for the rows, except here it's just separated by a new line. So by default, it'll just go loop through the amount of rows that you've selected here and just add a label for row 1, row 2, row 3, row 4, row 5. But if you wanted to customize those, you could do that here as well. Okay, I'm going to update these settings, and then I'm going to change these fields slightly. The next thing that I want to look at is parent field requirements. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, let's add a new field here. I'm going to do a drop-down field and replace the date. And I'm going to make this hazard field dependent on the task field being selected. The way I'm going to do that is go into the task field, and I'm going to grab this ID up here. So you can just select that, copy, paste, go into your hazard field, and then under the parent field ID, place that value. Now, if I update, you can see that we have this new text here that says this field requires the parent field select dropdown to have a value. Now, why is it saying select dropdown? That's because the label is select dropdown. So let's go back here and call this one task. Makes a little more sense now. And then for this one, we can do the same thing, go in here and call this hazard. And lastly, our text field here, we're going to call mitigation. And why not add some help text here that says, perfect. Now that gets added there as well. Okay, so now we have this hazard field dependent on the task field. What if we wanted to have certain hazards appear as options only when certain tasks are selected? Well, we can do that as well. To do that, let's go into our tasks and let's update our tasks options. So here under the choices, we have option 1, 2, and 3 by default. And then below this, we have some examples of how these option and values are set up. We have a format where it's value, label, whether or not it's checked, and then the dependent values list, which we'll look at in just a second. So what I'm going to do is remove all of this, and I'm going to add some tasks. So let's say drilling, welding, driving. Let's just leave it with drilling, welding, and driving for now. Now you can see that I'm not using this special format. And so it does support just entering text in here, and I'll show you what will happen. If we hit update, updates the field. If we go back in to edit this field, you can see that it automatically added the value as the text that we had just put in there. So that's all well and fine. But if you wanted to, you could do something like this, which makes it easier to reference these later just by using 1, 2, and 3. But for now, let's just do that. Okay, so drilling is our value and it's our label. The next thing it says here is whether or not it's checked. And for this particular field, I'm going to leave these empty and just do those two. I'm going to save that. And let's go into our hazard. So down in our hazard choices, I can say burns. Okay, and hit update. Okay, so I've added those, but I haven't added any dependencies yet. So to do that, let's go back in here. You can see it automatically added the values for all of these as the same as the text. So we've got that format. But this is where we put in our dependencies. So burns only make sense for the welding activity. So the next value here is whether or not this field is checked by default or selected. And all of these are going to be false for that. But then I'm going to say in the dependency value list, I'm going to say burns are applicable to welding. And maybe for the next one, those are also applicable to welding. So I'll put welding in there. Collision is not applicable to welding. And injury, I guess you could say is applicable to welding. So I'll put welding in there. So in this example, burns, electrocution, and injury are all applicable to welding. Okay, what were some other tasks that we had? Drilling or digging. Burns applicable to drilling? No, I don't think so. Electrocution? Yeah, I would say that it is. So for the dependency value list, it shows here an example. We need to select, we need to delineate each of these by a vertical pipe. So I'm going to add that, and I'm going to say drilling in there. And then collision, I don't think drilling makes sense for collision. Injury, I would say makes sense for, I don't know about injury as well either. So we've got drilling just for electrocution. Okay, then we had driving. Driving definitely makes sense for collision. So let's put driving here. And then let's also put it in injury here. And okay, I think that's good for now. Now let's go and update these settings. All right, so I'm just going to go back in here and make sure that these drilling, welding, and driving, those were the three that we had. And in our hazard choices, we definitely have drilling, welding, and driving reflected in all of these. Perfect. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to click Save Changes. Okay, so this will take me back to my Manage Custom Forms, and we can see our demo video form right here. Under the Publish column, we can see that it's not published. So I'm going to turn that on. You must publish your form in order to be able to actually create form entries with it. So I'm going to now click the plus button here, Show Unassigned Forms, and let's find my demo video form. There it is. If I click it, this is the form that we just built. We can see our first section with an address, our second section with a name, and our last section here with our dependency example. Remember, we selected the Show Initial Row, so it's only showing the first row. But as soon as we select a value, in this situation, drilling, second row becomes available to us. Now I've selected drilling, and the hazards that should show up for drilling are not showing up. So let's go back to our form here and double check our settings. Let's go to our hazard section. If we look at our choices, we can see that we've included our choices welding, and drilling. That's all well and good. But the issue is that the value that we've used is lowercase, and the value in our parent field is uppercase or title case. So this is an important lesson in that the values have to match exactly to what the values are in the parent field. So I'm going to update all of these to use title case and hit update. Save these changes, publish my form, and let's try that again. All right, so find my demo form, scroll down, and here we can see if we select drilling, we have the options for electrocution. If we select welding, we have burns and electrocution. And if we select driving, we have collision and injury. So there we go. We can see that dynamic dependency working for us right there. All right, let's close that down and let's go back into our demo video form. The last thing I want to look at is a special field called a repeater. So let's add a new section, place it at the bottom, and let's add a new field. I'm going to select the repeater field and drop it here. Now, the repeater field is very similar to the table field in that it gives you a couple placeholders for where you can put your own custom fields. Now, we only have 2 spots where we can add fields right now. So if we go to the repeater settings, scroll down, we can change the amount of fields that we can have here. So let's say 3, and then how many times this field can repeat. I'll say 5, and I'll update this. All right, so now I have 3 spots where I can add fields, and it says this field is repeatable up to 5 times. Okay, let's add some fields here. I'm going to put the name field and a signature field and a date field. Perfect. It's got name, signature, and date. I'm going to update the name field to have a label of worker name. Leave everything else the same and hit save. All right, so if I publish my form right now and I look at my demo form, if I scroll down, we can find our new section here. We have worker name 1, signature 1, and date 1. Hey, where did that 1 come from? Well, the 1 is automatically added on there because we selected this as a repeat field, which means that if we click this add more button right here, we'll get all those fields duplicated. But in this case, now it's worker 2, signature 2, date 2, and so on. Pretty neat, huh? All right, this concludes an overview of the form builder. There's obviously some fields that we didn't go over, but I'm pretty sure that if you get in there and start playing around, you'll get the hang of it. Thanks for watching this video. See you again next time.